Zara Simmons was standing in the middle of the sleek, modern lobby of Carrington Tech when her tote bag strap snapped and spilled a mess of fabric swatches and paint chips all over the polished marble floor. "Oh, come on," she muttered under her breath, dropping to her knees to gather the samples. She had 10 minutes to get to the top floor for her first major pitch as an independent interior designer. After 2 years of scraping by doing dentist offices, yoga studios, and one regrettable vape shop, this was her shot. Carrington Tech wasn't just any company, it was the fastest-growing software firm on the East Coast, and their CEO was known for being impossible to impress. "Need a hand?" Zara looked up. A man in a tailored charcoal suit crouched beside her, handing her a stack of color samples. His hair was dark and slightly messy, like he'd just run his hand through it. His eyes were sharp, familiar somehow. Definitely not someone from the lobby staff. "Thanks," she said quickly, her cheeks warming. "Stupid strap broke." He gave a short nod and stood up, brushing his hands off. "You're here for the office design?" She blinked. "Yeah. How'd you know?" "I have good instincts," he said, then turned and walked toward the elevator. Before stepping in, he added casually, "You'll need floor 42. The private wing." The doors closed before she could say thanks again. Zara shoved the mess back into her bag and jogged over to the elevators, heart thudding. Floor 42. Private wing. That wasn't in the original email, but she wasn't about to argue. Maybe they were more impressed with her proposal than she thought. At the top floor, she stepped out into a silent corridor, her heels clicking on the tile. Frosted glass doors lined the hall, but the one at the end stood open. She walked in, breath-catching. This was the CEO's office? It was massive floor-to-ceiling windows, black marble floors, clean modern lines, but somehow cold. Stylish, expensive, but empty. No warmth. No personality. Just power. "Miss Simmons." She turned and nearly choked. The man from the lobby stood behind a sleek desk, now without his jacket, sleeves rolled just enough to show strong forearms. He was watching her with a faint look of amusement. "You're the CEO?" she asked, stunned. "Michael Carrington," he said simply, coming around the desk. "And you're the one my assistant claims can make this place feel human." Zara straightened her back. "I can. If you let me." He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Then show me." The next hour was a blur of sketches, swatches, and fast talking. Zara walked him through her vision, introducing warmth through texture, layering in rich tones, balancing power with comfort. He didn't interrupt, didn't smile, didn't give much of anything away. When she finished, she pulled in a breath. "That's the direction I'd go. If you want something that says more than just money." Michael was silent for a long moment. "Then, you're hired." She blinked. "I am. I like people who aren't afraid to tell me what I need to hear." He glanced around the office. "And I hate this place. Fix it." Zara barely kept her jaw from dropping. "Okay," she said, grabbing her things before she could ruin it. "I'll send over a full proposal by tomorrow." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Miss Simmons." She looked back. "I meant it. I want this to feel human." His eyes held hers for a beat. "Do whatever it takes." It wasn't until she was back in the elevator that she realized her hands were shaking. She'd just been hired by Michael Carrington, a man whose face was on the cover of Forbes last month. A man who made deals worth millions with a single phone call. A man who, for some reason, had picked her. Zara had no idea what she just stepped into. 2 weeks later, Zara was knee-deep in swatches and renderings, and somehow she'd spent more time around Michael than she ever expected. He didn't just approve designs, he gave feedback, asked questions, challenged her choices. He wasn't rude, but he was sharp. Always so sharp. And for some reason, he always ended meetings with her alone. That day, she was setting up mood boards in the conference room when he walked in unannounced, carrying 2 coffees. "Figured you'd still be here," he said, handing her one. She blinked. "You brought me coffee? You like it black, right?" Her hand froze around the cup. He remembered. She'd mentioned it once in passing. "You didn't have to, I wanted to." The air shifted. Zara couldn't tell if it was the way he looked at her, focused, intense, or the way her stomach flipped every time he stood too close. "Michael," she said carefully, "why are you actually giving me so much of your time?" He leaned a hip against the table, sipping his own coffee. Because you're good at what you do. And maybe I like watching you work. She stared at him. That sounds like flirting. It is. She dropped her gaze, pulse racing. You shouldn't do that. You're my client. I'm also a man. He stepped closer. And you're the first person who's walked into this building and made it feel like something mattered besides quarterly reports. Zara's breath caught. Michael, this isn't a good idea. Maybe not. He looked at her, eyes unreadable. But I'm not known for playing it safe. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she arrived early to get her head on straight. She was unpacking new tiles when Michael walked in again, no warning, no knocking. I want to show you something, he said, holding out his hand. What? It's not in this building. Come on. She hesitated. Now? Yes. Against every rational part of her brain, she took his hand. He didn't take her to a restaurant or some fancy showroom. He drove her personally in a sleek black Aston Martin to a quiet street outside the city where he parked in front of a brick townhouse. This was the first place I ever lived alone, he said quietly. Before the money. Before any of this. Zara looked at him. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to see I wasn't always this version of me. She turned to face him. Why? Michael's jaw clenched, and then, in a low voice, he said, because I think I'm starting to feel something for you. And if that's going to happen, I want you to know the real me. Zara's heart stopped. She didn't know what to say, but she knew one thing: this man wasn't just her client anymore. And she was in trouble. Zara sat in the passenger seat of Michael's car, her fingers curled tightly around the seatbelt as the townhouse faded behind them. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken questions. He had just shown her a piece of his past, not the curated, PR-approved version, but something raw. And she didn't know what to do with that. Michael finally broke the silence. You're quiet. I'm trying to figure out what this is, she said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. We barely know each other, and yet you're treating me like I trust you? He interrupted, not taking his eyes off the road. That's rare for me. Zara turned to him. Why me? Why now? His jaw tightened as he shifted gears. Because you don't look at me like everyone else does. You don't see numbers when you look at me. You see flaws. You see space that needs filling. Her breath caught, but she didn't respond. Not yet. They returned to the city, and by the time Michael pulled into the underground garage beneath Carrington Tech, Zara had decided she needed distance. She couldn't afford to fall for a man who could buy and sell her life 10 times over. She couldn't afford to be reckless with the one client that could change everything for her. She stepped out of the car, her voice steady. Thank you for showing me that place. But from here on out, let's keep things professional. Michael's eyes darkened. Unreadable. If that's what you want. It is. Zara turned and walked away, heels echoing down the concrete ramp. The next day, she arrived at the office earlier than usual. The space was beginning to transform. Walnut paneling had been installed in the executive corridor. Custom lighting fixtures were being prepped for delivery, and the conference room now had a warmth it had never known before. She buried herself in work, keeping her head down and emotions locked up tight. At noon, Michael's assistant appeared at her workstation with a tablet. He wants you to weigh in on this, she said, handing it to Zara. It was a proposed design for a private lounge on the top floor, something she hadn't been told about. There's no lounge in the scope, Zara said, confused. Apparently, it's a new priority. Against her better judgment, she took the elevator to floor 42. Michael stood by the window, speaking quietly into an earpiece. He ended the call as she approached and gestured toward the design mock-up on the large screen behind him. I want that lounge built, but I want you to decide what it looks like. Zara folded her arms. Why wasn't this discussed before? I didn't think I needed it before. Do you need it now? He paused. I need something that feels like peace. Zara studied him. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. The man who always looked in control now looked tired. What's going on? She asked. Michael leaned against the long table, his eyes distant. Someone I trusted tried to undercut me. A partner in a deal overseas. I've been putting out fires all week. It was the first time he'd admitted to vulnerability. No spin, no polished front. Why tell me? She asked. Because you're the only one here who doesn't gain anything from my success. Zara took in a slow breath. If I design it, it'll be for you. Not for show. Not for clients. For you. His gaze lifted to hers. That's exactly what I want. She nodded. Then I'll need access to your personal preferences. Music, favorite colors, textures you gravitate toward. I want to build something that reflects who you actually are. He hesitated. You're sure you want to get that close? I'm not afraid of seeing you clearly. She held his gaze. Are you afraid of being seen? He didn't answer. Over the next week, Zara threw herself into the new project. She requested everything: old photos, playlists, even the scent of his favorite cologne. Michael didn't resist. He gave her access to pieces of himself no one else had ever asked for. She discovered he listened to classical music late at night, that his favorite place in the world was a quiet cabin in Norway he hadn't visited in years, that he hated open-concept living spaces because they reminded him of the chaos he grew up in. It was intimacy with boundaries, deep but unspoken. Until one night when Zara stayed late to go over material samples and he walked in carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. You've been here for 10 hours, he said. Take a break. She hesitated. This isn't a date. I know, he replied. But the wine's already open. She accepted the glass, if only because her body ached and her brain felt fried. They sat on the unfinished sectional in the corner of the lounge, surrounded by boxes and wires. The city glowed beneath the windows, skyscrapers flickering like stars. Zara took a sip. You know, I never expected any of this. What did you expect? Some soulless exec who wanted a Pinterest board slapped on his walls. Michael laughed, really laughed. It was low and rough and unexpected. She looked over at him, stunned. That's the first time I've heard you laugh. Maybe I don't get the chance often. The moment hung between them, heavy and electric. Zara set down her glass. I should go. Michael didn't move. Or you could stay. She stood. I told you before. I can't mix business with whatever this is. And I told you, he said, rising to meet her, I don't do anything halfway. Zara looked up at him, heart in her throat. Then maybe I'm the wrong person for this job. He stepped closer. Or maybe you're the only one who ever saw the job for what it really was. She shook her head, backing away. I need space. Michael didn't follow. He just watched her go. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Zara pressed her forehead against the wall, heart pounding. She wasn't sure if she was running away from something dangerous or from the one thing she'd been waiting for her entire life. Rain clattered against the glass walls of Zara's studio apartment as she leaned over her drafting table, measuring out the proportions for the custom shelving she'd designed for Michael's private lounge. The city blurred beyond the window, a mess of silver streaks and neon reflections. She hadn't seen him in 4 days. She'd expected him to call, to push, to challenge her like he always did. But the silence was worse, louder somehow, and it left her caught between regret and self-preservation. A sharp knock broke through the storm's rhythm. She glanced at the clock just after 8. She wasn't expecting deliveries, and no one ever visited this late. When she opened the door, Michael stood on the other side, water dripping from the shoulders of his dark wool coat. He looked like he'd just walked through the storm without noticing. Zara's breath hitched. How do you know where I live? I asked your assistant, he said. She didn't want to tell me. I told her it was about a design emergency. That's not funny. I'm not laughing. She hesitated, then stepped aside. You shouldn't be here. He stepped inside, scanning the small space, cramped but warm, filled with textiles, sketches pinned to the walls, and a single flickering candle on the kitchen counter. No trace of the steel and glass world he came from. I've never seen where you work, he said. I don't invite clients here. Michael's coat dripped onto the floor. He didn't seem to notice. I haven't stopped thinking about the way you walked out. You were asking me to cross a line I can't afford to blur. You think this is about power? He turned to face her. I've had control over everything in my life for the last 15 years. But somehow I can't stop thinking about a woman who told me to add velvet to my boardroom. Zara folded her arms. You have to stop doing this. Doing what? Turning everything into a challenge. You push, I resist. You chase, I run. That's not a relationship. That's a game. Michael's expression shifted, something raw flickering in his eyes. I had an older brother. He died when I was 19. Her arms dropped to her sides. What? He was the one who wanted to start a company. I just wanted to survive. But after the accident, I inherited everything: his plans, his investors, his name on the patents. I didn't build Carrington Tech alone. I built it because I was too guilty not to. Zara stepped closer, her voice low. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm tired of pretending I'm unbreakable. You're the only person I've met in years who sees through the armor. And I want to be seen by you. Not as a client. Not as a paycheck. As a man. The rain outside softened, but the silence inside deepened. You don't know me, she whispered. I know the way you sketch when you're nervous. I know you hate overhead lighting. I know you hum when you're calculating measurements. I know you've been fighting to matter in a world that keeps underestimating you. Zara's throat tightened. You shouldn't say those things. Why not? Because I want to believe them. He stepped closer. Then believe them. Her pulse thundered in her ears. I can't lose this project. You won't. And if it ends badly, then it ends honestly. She closed her eyes for a long moment. Michael, I don't want to be someone you chase just to prove you can catch me. I'm not chasing you anymore. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. I'm giving you something instead. She took it slowly, unfolding the paper. Her breath caught when she saw it: a contract amendment. Her company would remain the lead designer for Carrington Tech's full expansion, including 3 new properties. Guaranteed for 2 years. No strings. You're securing my future. I'm removing the power imbalance, he said. So the next move is yours. She looked up at him, her voice barely audible. You're giving me a choice. For the first time in a long time, I'm not asking for anything I haven't earned. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. You should go, she said, her voice thick. He nodded once, then turned to the door. But just before stepping out, he paused. For what it's worth, I meant every word. Especially the ones that scared you. When the door closed behind him, Zara stood frozen. The next morning, she arrived at the Carrington building with a new plan rolled tightly under her arm. The receptionist looked up in surprise. Zara hadn't been seen since the lounge proposal. Zara didn't wait. She bypassed the assistants, the interns, the guarded glances, and marched straight to the elevator. She didn't stop until she reached the top floor. Michael was pacing the lounge, unfinished still, but already transformed with deep tones and soft lighting. He turned when he heard the door. You came back. She walked straight to the table and slapped down the new plan. I redesigned it. His expression was unreadable. Why? Because the last version was still polished. Still curated. This one's yours. It's flawed and layered and real. He opened the plan, eyes scanning the sketches: raw textures, worn leather, rough wood edges, a fireplace that didn't belong in a corporate building but made the space feel lived in. She'd even sketched in a quiet reading corner tucked away behind a divider. You were right, she said. This was never just about the project. It was about finding something honest. Michael set the plan down, then looked at her. Does this mean you're staying? I'm not going anywhere. But I'm not here because of what you gave me. I'm here because I want to be. He didn't move. You trust me? I trust myself enough to see this through. Michael walked toward her. Slower this time. No pressure in his steps. Then tell me one thing. What? If I reach for you now, will you stop me? She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped into his arms. A week later, Zara stood alone in the private lounge she'd finished designing. The last of the velvet armchairs had been delivered that morning, and the woven wool rug now lay flush beneath the low oak coffee table. The scent of bergamot and cedar diffused through the air, subtle and grounding. It wasn't just a room anymore, it was a retreat. A place that reflected not the man Michael had been trained to become, but the man he'd never had permission to be. She brushed a hand along the bookshelf she'd had hand-built from aged walnut. The titles lining the shelves weren't business manuals or finance tomes, they were novels and poetry and collections of essays. Books Michael had once told her he used to read when he still had time to feel like a person. Behind her, the door opened with a quiet click. "I thought you'd be gone before I got back," Michael said, undoing the buttons on his coat. "I almost was," Zara replied without turning around. "But I guess I wanted to see the finished version in quiet first." He stepped beside her, looking out over the room. "You did more than finish it. You gave it a heartbeat." Her eyes drifted over the space. "Do you remember what this room looked like when I first walked in? Empty. Cold." "Exactly." Michael reached into his coat pocket and took out a small, flat box. "I've been carrying this around for days. Couldn't decide when to give it to you." Zara frowned and took the box slowly, her fingers brushing his. She opened it. Inside was a brass nameplate polished to a soft shine. It read, "Zara Simmons, lead designer, Carrington expansion." Her throat tightened. "You said you didn't want to be someone's paycheck," Michael said. "So I made sure you never would be." "I don't understand," she said, voice catching. "You're not a contractor anymore. You're a partner. You'll have your own team, full creative control. We've already filed the paperwork." Zara stared at him. "You did all this without telling me?" "I didn't want to offer it until I knew it wasn't the reason you'd choose me." Her hands closed around the box. "And what if I'd said no? Then the offer would still stand. But I'd have to learn to live with the fact that I met the right person at the wrong time." Zara set the box on the table and turned to face him. "You're not the man I thought I'd meet when I walked into this office." "I know," he said. "That man was easier to manage. He didn't feel things. He didn't make space for anyone. And now I want to wake up and know that the person beside me saw through all of it and stayed anyway." Zara looked up at him. "I don't care about your penthouse, or your suits, or your name." He stepped closer, gaze never leaving hers. "Then what do you care about? That when you sit on that sofa, you finally feel like you're home." Michael didn't answer. He just closed the last inch between them and kissed her slow, certain, and stripped of all performance. It wasn't the kind of kiss meant to impress. It was the kind meant to last. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to hide from anything anymore. Not the past. Not the guilt. Not you. You don't have to," she whispered. "But you do have to let someone stay." He let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "Then stay." She nodded once. "I will. But only if you promise to let me redecorate your penthouse. It's a crime against natural light." He let out a low laugh. "Deal. But only if you promise to move into it with me." Zara raised an eyebrow. "You're not subtle, are you? I've wasted enough time pretending I'm not in love with you." The words hit her like a current, unexpected but right. Her hands slid up his chest, resting just over his heart. "Then don't pretend anymore." 3 months later, the Carrington Tech offices reopened with a gallery-style launch party, showcasing the redesigned executive spaces and their new lounge. The media buzzed about the bold design choices, the unexpected warmth, the shift in tone. But what caught the most attention was the woman who arrived on Michael Carrington's arm. She wore a charcoal jumpsuit with gold cuffs and an easy smile, her hair swept up not for elegance but convenience. She stopped to shake hands, answer questions, and laugh at the stunned expressions of those who hadn't expected the world's most unreadable CEO to look so human. When a reporter asked how it felt to be the most powerful couple in tech, Michael simply said, "Power means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with." And Zara? She just looked at him, eyes soft but steady, and said, "I was hired to decorate an office. I didn't know I'd build a life." Later that night, when the guests were gone and the lights dimmed, he pulled her into the lounge she'd built and led her to the fireplace. "I have one more thing to ask," he said, reaching into his jacket. Zara's breath caught as he dropped to one knee and opened a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, timeless. "I've spent years building things that would outlast me," he said. "But it's the only thing I want to last forever." She didn't wait. She dropped to her knees beside him, threw her arms around his neck, and whispered, "Yes." Later, as they sat together by the fire, her head on his shoulder and his fingers laced with hers, Michael looked around the room once more. It was no longer just a lounge. It was where he'd found the only thing money couldn't buy. And this time he wasn't letting it go. The sun filtered gently through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Michael's penthouse, casting ribbons of light across the white oak floors. Zara stood barefoot in the middle of the newly redesigned living space, her fingers tracing the edge of the stone breakfast counter she'd chosen herself. The room was no longer a cold, sleek monument to wealth. It was warm, lived in, filled with textures and colors that whispered comfort instead of screaming status. Outside, the city buzzed below, but within these walls, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from peace, not absence. Michael emerged from the hallway tugging on the cuff of a navy shirt. His eyes found Zara immediately. "You're up early," he said, crossing to her. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice soft. "I kept thinking about your mother." Michael's expression shifted, not with sadness, but reflection. "She called last night after the engagement announcement went public." Zara's brows lifted. "And? She invited us to dinner. Said she wants to meet the woman who clearly knows how to handle me." Zara laughed under her breath. "Should I be nervous? She already loves you. She told me she hasn't seen me this grounded since before. Everything." Zara reached for his hand. "Then we'll go." They stood there a moment, fingers entwined, letting the morning settle around them. Later that afternoon, they arrived at a quiet estate just outside the city where manicured gardens wrapped around a stone house that looked more like an art gallery than a home. But inside, the warmth surprised her. Handmade quilts on the backs of chairs, mismatched teacups on the sideboard, and one fluffy tabby cat perched like royalty on the windowsill. Michael's mother, Delia, was tall and elegant, her silver-streaked hair gathered into a loose twist. She hugged Zara without hesitation. "You've done what no one else could," Delia said. "You gave him back to us." Zara smiled, touched. "He did that himself. I just helped him remember who he was." Dinner passed with laughter, wine, and stories Zara had never heard, like how Michael once tried to build a treehouse using only duct tape and willpower, or how he'd gotten suspended for refusing to sell a science project he'd accidentally made go viral online. On the drive back, Michael reached over and rested his hand on her thigh, his voice quiet. "You fit into my life better than I ever imagined anyone could." Zara leaned into him. "That's because you stopped trying to make it fit a mold." When they returned to the city, they found a package waiting at the security desk. Inside was a framed photo, Michael and Zara in the lounge during the launch party. His arm around her waist, her head tilted toward him, both unaware the photo had even been taken. There was a note from his assistant, Marla. "You both look like you finally exhaled." Zara placed it on the console table in the entryway without a word. Neither of them needed to say anything. 2 months later, the wedding took place in the garden of a restored villa in Lake Como. It was private, intimate, and utterly theirs. Zara wore an off-the-shoulder ivory gown with a veil stitched by her grandmother's hands, and Michael wore a slate suit with no tie, just a single white rose pinned to his lapel. As Zara walked down the aisle, escorted by her younger brother, she saw it in Michael's eyes, not pride, not triumph, just awe. Like he couldn't believe she was real. When she reached him, he whispered, "You make every version of my life before you feel like rehearsal." They exchanged vows beneath a canopy of olive branches and late spring roses. Every word was spoken without hesitation, without fear. She promised to meet him where he was, always. He promised to never lose himself in the noise again. The reception was a celebration more than a spectacle. Long tables filled with friends, laughter echoing under the stars, candlelight flickering on wine glasses. Zara danced barefoot by the end of the night, her shoes long forgotten, her dress speckled with grass and joy. Michael pulled her close for one last song, resting his forehead against hers as strings played softly in the distance. I used to think the most beautiful thing I ever built was this company, he murmured. But it's this. You and me. This life. She kissed him, slow and certain. And it's only just beginning. In the months that followed, things shifted, not dramatically, but deeply. Zara's design firm expanded into its own full floor of the Carrington building, her name etched in the glass. Her team growing, handpicked from underrepresented talent across the city. She mentored fiercely, defended passionately, and never once compromised her vision. Michael stepped back from day-to-day operations. He remained at the helm, but now he left early enough to cook dinner, to walk the city at sunset with Zara, to learn the name of every person on her team. They traveled quiet getaways to places that fed them, Kyoto in the fall, the English countryside in spring, a cabin in Norway where they lit a fire and read for days. They didn't rush anything. They didn't need to. One morning, Zara stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a ceramic mug shaped like a swan. Michael came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. I have news, he said. Good news. The best. That nonprofit you introduced me to? The one that builds creative spaces for kids in underserved schools? I funded 5 more. Zara turned in his arms. You didn't tell me. I wanted to surprise you. She kissed the corner of his mouth. You're getting good at that. Only because you made me believe in more than numbers. As the years unfolded, they made a habit of turning ordinary moments into sacred ones. Breakfast on their balcony became a ritual. Sunday mornings were for sleeping in. Every year on the anniversary of her first pitch, Michael took Zara back to the original office, now a redesigned team space, and they'd sit on the same sofa she'd once chosen for him. They didn't talk about endings, only beginnings. And though the world continued to shift around them, one truth never changed: they chose each other. Not just once. Every day. In every way. Always.